but I want to get your thoughts off the top on this fight between Dillashaw Cejudo being made to the surprise of many at 125 and not 135 pounds.
Well, it was certainly to my surprise, especially given the rumors that they were going to get rid of the 125-pound division, right? So, listen, at the end of the day, what this tells me is that TJ Dillashaw is a fighter, all right? This is a guy who's not concerned with, oh, what fight is going to make me the most amount of money? This is a guy who is fighting for legacy. He's fighting to truly test himself. And this fucker just wants to beat people up. I'm going to be candid with you. I think this is a guy who loves to fight and hurt people. You hear about the stories from him in the training room to him, the way that he performs in the octagon. This guy really deserves that moniker of Dillashaw. And I'm just really impressed with the guy. And if you look at some of his past performances and what he's done, and even look back into that fight against Dominic Cruz, a fight that certainly could have gone his way,
right?
He might be the best fighter pound for pound on the planet. Look at all the skills that he brings to the table. There really aren't many weaknesses in TJ Dillashaw. You look at the skills that he integrates, the sophisticated footwork, the fact that he's going and training with one of the best boxers of our generation in Lomachenko. This guy is in pursuit of something else besides money. And to me, that is a welcome change in a time where everyone wants as much money as possible and holding out. You don't really hear these stories from TJ Dillashaw. Even when he's injured, he just wants to come back and kick ass. And I'm surprised that this guy doesn't have more fans. And yes, he's a lighter weight fighter. But again, this is another testament to a guy who is an absolute brilliant fighter and wants to fight the best, period, regardless of anything else. Oh, you want to fight at 125? Cool. I'm sure this guy would fight at 145, 155. It does not matter. He just wants to kick some ass. So Henry Cejudo is a fantastic fighter. He's an Olympic champion. Okay, those are rare. Doesn't matter where you're going. And the fact that we have one in the UFC is extremely special. This is a guy who, of course, beat Demetrius Johnson. So, you know, while I think there's a lot of tremendous fights at 135 pounds, I think for TJ Dillashaw, he realizes, listen, if I can go out there and beat the guy who beat Demetrius Johnson, that might just be just as good.
Well, and I'm glad to hear you give TJ Dillashaw his credit, because the masses just don't seem to want to, in terms of skill for skill, being one of the best pound-for-pound fighters, at least top 10 that I've ever seen fight live in person. And I think history is going to look back upon what he did a lot more fondly than maybe fans do right now. Just in terms of ruining Renan Barão, it seems like people want to denigrate that because of where Barão went from there. You know, like they just don't want to give him...
You can argue that TJ Dillashaw was the guy who did that, right?
Well, right. Of course, I think most would argue that. You know, some will suggest that TJ is ducking the bantamweight contenders, and we'll get to those bantamweight contenders in a second. That is just not the case at all. It's a guy who's chasing greatness. Some will also say that going up to become a two-division champion, as Daniel Cormier and Conor McGregor did, is different than going down. I don't see one accomplishment, Kenny, as vastly superior to the other. I think TJ Dillashaw would be proving that he's undersized a little bit at bantamweight and can still twice become the greatest 135-pounder in the world.
Right.
I do think he's small to go up to featherweight. But to me, if he wants to, you know, stare death in the face and cut down to 125 pounds to prove himself as a pound-for-pound great, to me, I don't see that as a lesser accomplishment going down to fight the smaller man. I think it just boosts up his credentials at 35, you know, given that he was undersized. But I think a lot of fans see those as two very different things, moving up to get a second belt versus moving down.
I couldn't agree with you more. And listen, I think that the fans are missing out on really just one of the best fighters that I've ever seen. And I've doubted him, you know, myself. I thought Cody Garbrandt matched up really well against him, but TJ Dillashaw proved that he was just too much. I mean, doing it twice and finishing a guy like Cody Garbrandt, who was extremely dangerous, and you factor that into everything else this guy has accomplished, there's no doubt in my mind this guy will go down as one of the true greats in this sport.
And in terms of the disbanding of the flyweight division, fans, I think, are proceeding as if it's a foregone conclusion. I think the writing is on the wall. I wouldn't take all your cues from Jared the Monkey God Brooks and Jose Shorty Torres necessarily, two guys who have been cut. But Joseph Benavidez was rebooked quickly against Alex Perez coming up on November 30th. This title fight is in late January. If this is the last fight in the division here between Dillashaw and Cejudo, I understand why people would say this matchup makes less sense. I just don't see the harm, and I think it would actually be a pretty decent way to usher out that division. Now, the big losers in all of this, Kenny, are the guys at 135 pounds. And you won't get any argument from me that these guys deserve better. And I don't know if the solution is a number one contenders bout that is made official that way between Marlon Moraes and Rafael Assunção or Dominic Cruz and John Lineker, whatever it is. But at bantamweight, Kenny, you have two, if not three, worthy contenders who have been sitting on the sidelines. Foremost among them for me, Marlon Moraes, been out since June 1st. 33-second knockout that ended Jimmy Rivera's 20-fight winning streak. Moraes' 16th win in 17 fights, and I think more importantly, Kenny, second straight flush knockout in the UFC after the knee against Aljamain Sterling and then that most recent result against Jimmy Rivera. You've got Rafael Assunção. He's won 11 of 12. Only loss in there was to TJ Dillashaw. That was fairly recent, but he beat Rob Font back in July. Fourth straight win for him. And then, of course, you got Dominic Cruz, who is 22-2, but he's been out since December of 2016. So those guys lose in this equation, but for me, I think for Marlon Moraes, it's most unfortunate for him that he is ready to go. The TJ fight is a fresh matchup that makes a lot of sense, and he just can't seem to get that fight.
It is unfortunate. And listen, when you go through all the different names and everything those guys have accomplished, you realize that the 135-pound division is one of the strongest in the UFC. And for Marlon Moraes, he's done amazing things. This guy has done everything, and he's done it in dramatic fashion to try to get that title shot. He's not going to get it. I don't know what they're going to do. There's been rumors. I don't think it's official, right? The Dominic Cruz and John Lineker fight. I don't think that's been officially announced, but I know they're talking about it as a potential fight as well. Perhaps they're having that as a backup plan, or perhaps the winner of that would get the next title shot. Now, Dominic Cruz has certainly been in the UFC a lot longer than Marlon Moraes. So I'm curious to see which direction the UFC will head as far as the next title challenger at 135 pounds. But either way, it's interesting. I want to see the best fights as soon as possible. But guess what? That division is going to have to marinate a little bit. And I'm not displeased with that either way. There's a lot of fantastic fights in the future. And Moraes, I think it's probably going to have to be a long wait for him. I assume he's going to have to take one other fight. In the meantime, perhaps that means it's a rematch against a guy in Rafael Assunção, who also has done a lot of great things to deserve a title shot at TJ Dillashaw.
And I believe for Assunção, it comes down to money, right? He wants to get paid on a level that Marlon Moraes is in order to accept that rematch. All right, we got to table that for a second, because now with us on the guest line, as promised, the head coach of the Gilroy High School wrestling team in California, also two-time United States Olympian team captain, UFC heavyweight, light heavyweight champion, the captain of the American Kickboxing Academy, and a man who, Ken Flo, had he served our country at this point, I think he would have even passed Brian Stann as the greatest living American. Daniel Cormier is with us. Good morning, DC. How are you, bud?
Hey, thanks for that, John. Was making me feel good about myself. I love it.
Well, I know Brian Stann's not going to like that, but I was just thinking, is Stan still the greatest living American? I guess DC didn't serve the country, but man, you're closing on B. Stan. I'm telling you.
Let me tell you something, man. With the way Brian Stan is, and also the look, Stan's got the square jaw, the marine. Stan's got the look. Brian Stan is the definition of what the American man is made of.
100%. And we'll let him still have that distinction, because he doesn't have 8 UFC gold belts sitting in his hallway like you do. As we sit here on November 12th, 2018, you can lay claim to being the greatest MMA fighter of all time. And had you lost to Derek Lewis 9 days ago, that status would have taken a hit. Every time you fight, essentially, you put that status on the line. Yet in this spot, you just seem totally immune to the pressure of the moment, despite the fact that there were some circumstances working against you. What is it about your ability, your inner will or otherwise, that allows you, despite some circumstances that maybe aren't ideal, to always, or I should say never, kind of be flat on fight night?
I just think it comes from a lifetime of competition. I've been competing for so long that when I do decide to go and fight or to go and wrestle a match or whatever the case may be, I try to just take it serious. when I started to get, John, a little bit of the DC's gonna overlook this guy, or even I was talking to the guys from Dan Levitard, and I was making jokes, and they were like, "This seems like a trap fight, DC. It seems like one of those fights where you're taking this guy lightly." I said I would never, because I respect the sport and I respect what I've done too much to let it fall to the wayside because I overlook some guy that's so dangerous. I take it serious, man, and everything. I mean, it doesn't even stop with just the fighting. In every aspect of my life, if I am committed to something, I try to do it to the best of my ability.